Check, check. There we go. Better? Okay. Well, hopefully you heard my introduction of myself, but it's great to be here tonight. My wife is here. I actually didn't think she was going to be able to make it. She came down with something that's been going around her office. Not COVID, but something. I think that welcome to spring and winter and whatever else we have going on outside triggers some kind of head cold. So she is in the back, and so it's nice to have her here tonight. But Laura's from Northumberland, and as I mentioned, it's been great to be a part of this area for the last number of years. So we work with Keys Connections, and I know when I was here, probably a couple years ago, I think I shared in your service, I talked a little bit about some of the work that we're doing. Very timely updates tonight, because what's happening in Ukraine is very important with our ministry and what we're doing. The other member of our family right now, my wife and I are empty nesters, so we ended up getting a little puppy, Juno, at the very beginning of 2020. Had no idea in January of 2020 that it would be such a great year to get a puppy, because COVID just made it the perfect year to have a puppy. So she's the other member of our family right now. Keys Connections has at the heart of it training people to share God's word. Training pastors, missionaries, social workers. There's now a business program of how can we honor God in these different areas and share Him. And our main school is located in Moldova. That's where the graduation picture is taking place. Moldova, typically I would have to spend a lot of time explaining where Moldova is. Now, I'll give a real quick map here, but if you've seen anything related to Ukraine, you now know where Moldova is, because it was flooded with refugees, just like many other countries in Eastern Europe. But our organization really reaches post-Soviet countries. And we have students from Moldova, but our organization has been working to raise finances and to develop a program at this school so Central Asians can go and learn the various things I just mentioned about becoming church planters, being missionaries. And they learn, how can we share the gospel in an Islamic context? Most of our students, we have about 80 or 90 of them right now on campus who are from Central Asia. Those are your STAN countries, and I'll show a map a little bit later. But that's Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, anything that ends with STAN typically is going to be one of your Central Asian countries. So our students come from those locations. Typically, 95% plus would be Islamic in those nations, would be Muslims, and typically your evangelical Christians are going to be at the most maybe 1%, maybe 2% of the population. So there's a huge need for the gospel to go, and our model is to train people from those countries. They know the language, they know the people, they know the culture, and they can be very equipped to share the gospel, even when situations hit and people have to leave, or Westerners can't go to those countries. They're there, and they're able to share the gospel. So I've really enjoyed being on. I've been to campus about 10 times now. My wife's been there several times. Laura has a counseling and social work background. So we were both introduced to this school and this program back in 2012, and she's had opportunities to connect with the social work department. We were actually supposed to be in Moldova just a couple of weeks ago. She was going to teach a class about drug and alcohol addiction and use some of her counseling background with students there. And I was going to be teaching my communications class, but situations happened where all air travel was canceled in and out of Moldova and Ukraine, and plans changed. But God's always in control despite all of those things, of course. Well, I do want to talk a little bit about what's happening in Ukraine, as our ministry is very close by of what's happening there. In fact, in the last couple of years since COVID, our organization, we work heavily with Bible colleges and universities and helping churches to grow in some of the locations I just mentioned. Well, in 2020, we realized a lot of schools were very underprepared for COVID and then having to teach virtually. It took a little while for some of the schools here to be able to catch up and to share things online. Well, in Ukraine and other parts of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, the schools just didn't fully have the technology. They didn't have all of the training needed. So we were able to actually start working with some schools to provide partial funding on some of these projects so they could purchase, whether it was smart boards or some of the other cameras, projectors, some other things to be able to teach better online. We had a chance to work with about 6 or 7 Smaller Bible schools, one or two of them were a little bit larger, maybe 300 students, but some of them 50 to 100 students. But these Bible colleges located in Ukraine. And they were so thankful for the projects. It was great to get to know them. We get pictures and see how everything's being used. Well, now we're staying connected to them in a different way because we've been trying to send them some resources and things because of the fact they're looking still to serve in Ukraine during this time of war that's taking place. And some of the schools that were on the eastern part of the country, they had to evacuate. Some of the schools in the western part of the country have been hosting and serving refugees as they move through. But these are actually images that some of the educators there that we're staying connected with, that they shared with us. There's a picture of two people just sheltering in an apartment building during one of the air raid sirens. And a number of churches and other locations have obviously been heavily impacted by the bombing that's taken place there. You see evil and human actions at its worst. But then you also can see people serving and just helping one another because they're people. The image of people having to leave, they're hard to see. This is actually a train car, and people literally piled on top of each other just looking for a place to sleep. They kept the train car totally no lights at night because they didn't want it to be targeted and attract more attention from a bombing standpoint or anything like that, military standpoint. But this is kind of the situation that some people are facing trying to leave their country. One of the people that was sharing from within Ukraine, they say, I feel a little guilty talking about pets, but that's part of the suffering that happens as well. Of course, we're most concerned with people, but at the same time, we love our pets and animals, and that dog was traumatized. And here this woman carried him about 10 miles. If you've heard of Mariupol, it's one of the cities in the southern part of Ukraine that's just been leveled, absolutely devastated. Just a few days before that took place, this picture was taken of her walking her dog in a way that we're not used to seeing someone have to walk a dog out of that location. These are heartbreaking images, and I don't want to spend too long on that. I don't want it to, but at the same time, this is reality in life. We can kind of consume as much as we feel like we can of this, and then we kind of walk away from it and maybe get our minds on other things. For them, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it's difficult. But I want to focus on the opportunities that come out of difficulties to be able to share the gospel. Let me just read real quick, just Colossians chapter 4. I just want to highlight a few verses here. Without going too deep into the background of Colossians, if you were to read the first 3 chapters, Paul is writing this letter to a church that he actually had not attended yet. He was kind of connecting with people through this letter, and good maybe to build some relationship even before he would arrive and be able to encourage people. And he was warning them about the dangers of false teaching. I think we know through every point of history, including today, there are people that will try and pull us off track and get us with wrong thoughts about God, or not even thinking about God at all, and just mixing everything together, and people come up with their own ideas and philosophies about things. And the church at Colossians, he was thankful for them. He had heard many positive things about their faith, but he was encouraging them and warning them about the danger of the false teaching that was existing. So he starts off in chapter 1 about that, and then he spends time just reminding and building in them the truth about who Christ is. Reminding them about the goodness of God. And then as the book continues in Colossians, he talks about how when we have that relationship and knowledge of God, that it can impact the way that we live. So he gets very practical about relationships, husbands and wives, and even slaves and masters, and he kind of hits different aspects of life and how it's important how we live. Having the fruit of the Spirit, things like that. He encourages people. And then we get to chapter 4. And he says this, starting with verse 2, some added instructions he gives. He says to continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us that God may open to us a door for the word to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I'm in prison, that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. Paul is letting them know that there's opportunity, and Paul is writing this from a position of being in prison. And some of the areas we're going to talk about tonight, especially in Central Asia and some locations, it's a reality that some people are actually imprisoned for their faith, face persecution like that. And here we see that Paul, is encouraging them to be in prayer, to be watchful, with thankful hearts. I mentioned being at WGRC for a lot of years, and I would get there early in the morning. I did a morning show and did the early morning news, that kind of thing. And Ron Hutchcraft was a radio host that was always on early in the morning. So I always kind of had my morning devotions as I'm typing at my computer. I'd hear Ron sharing in his program. And it was neat to have him at some events and to get to know him. Just a real heart for wanting people to encounter and know Christ and to share him with others. And one of the things he'd come back to in this passage from Colossians 4 is something he calls the 3 open prayer. And it was something that kind of resonated with me, and I actually stop and think to pray this from time to time, because if you're like me, we can get really busy with our agenda. We got a to-do list. We're doing all these kind of things, and maybe we miss, the encounters that are around us. But Ron said there's 3 opens here. We see in Colossians 2, we see that he's asking them to pray that God would open to us a door for the word. Praying for open doors, that we would have opportunities to share Christ with people. We encounter people all the time, and I think, again, sometimes I miss those opportunities, but praying that we can see when God gives us a door to start to just encourage someone, to share God's love, to watch for that. Paul wanted that, and oftentimes our open doors can be as we kind of connect in life a little bit. We may find we have similar interests with someone. Maybe we've been through similar experiences. I'm going to also say maybe it's an open door because of a war that just suddenly comes out of nowhere for people in a country. Praying for open doors, and then also praying for open hearts. When we have an opportunity to interact with people, the work of salvation is a God thing. God is the one that will soften someone's heart to hear the gospel. And so praying that God would ready people to hear it. So pray for open doors, pray for their open hearts, and then ultimately here he says to pray for an open mouth. He says to pray that he would declare the mystery of Christ on account of which I'm in prison, that I may make it clear, this is how I ought to speak. And I've thought of that a few times. In December or November, I was flying to Moldova, and I sometimes remember this prayer, and I was thinking, okay, I'm going to be sitting next to someone, the person I knew on my right. I didn't know who the person was going to be on my left, so I thought I'm going to pray for an open door and pray for an open heart and pray that I actually open my mouth. Well, hear this, and sometimes you'll find someone who comes in, first thing they do is stick their earbuds in, and you can kind of tell when people don't want to talk to you, that kind of thing. They're just maybe glued to the TV screen or whatever. This older woman sits down, and so she just started making a little small talk with her about what she was doing, and here she was traveling to see someone who she hadn't seen for a while, and the pandemic had kind of changed a lot of things and plans. And so she starts just really opening up, and we had this really neat conversation. And it was a short flight from Moldova to Istanbul, and so maybe a little over an hour. But we probably talked for about 45 minutes to an hour. And she actually was part of a more like a Catholic, Orthodox type background. And so she allowed me to pray with her, and we had opportunities to talk about Jesus and who he is and things like that. And I mean, I'm still working on this in my life. I'm not always as good about remembering to look for these open doors, but I want to just encourage you that this is something we can be praying about for ourselves, for missionary partners, that God would open up doors for us to share about his goodness and his grace, and people need that message of hope. And I mention that now because this war in Ukraine has opened a lot of doors for the gospel. Our organization, we started, I mentioned about how we have a Bible university in Moldova. Right now, our university is housing refugees. There are about 70 living on campus, and we'll talk a little bit more about the flow of refugees. But they are sometimes just coming for a few nights. Sometimes when you make that trek, I showed the picture of leaving Ukraine, sometimes you haven't slept for a couple of days. You just need somewhere to sleep, to refresh, to eat. Some people need help, not just with transportation, but maybe getting documentation or other needs that they might have. So our faculty has been working to go back and forth to the border and pick people up, and they'll stay at our school. We also have a camp trade school, which is housing as many as 150. I think right now there's closer to 100 that are staying there. So we've had a continual flow of refugees, hundreds literally, that have stayed at our facility. And Keys Connections has been working through that in order to meet needs of people, but then also there's a union of churches, about 50 that are connected, evangelical-based churches who are assisting hundreds of refugees as they come through. So we've been working with evangelical partners, again, helping provide resources for meals, for lodging, for transportation, for Bible distribution. This one lady in the picture there has been distributing Bibles in Moldova, and it's been really great to hear about the encounters. We've had some people from Ukraine ask when the next worship service is going to be, and so they've been doing music. They get the youth involved. They'll have music in the evenings and just share from God's Word. People want to hear a message of hope, and some of them are believers that come. We obviously, our school and the churches, they've had contacts that will reach out and come. But I'd say at most times, maybe up to half, 40 to 50%, are not believers who come through. So they have an opportunity to really interact with the Christian community through this. So again, God can accomplish a lot of things. We know that. So when we see the tragic side of things, know that there's also this amount of light that's being shared as well amidst the darkness. Moldova, here's your geography moment. So you have Ukraine there on the right side of the map where the war is taking place. Moldova's in the red. Moldova is a vulnerable country in that it's not part of NATO. A lot of times there's that concern of what is Russia's intent going to be next? Is Moldova in a vulnerable situation? Ultimately, the Lord knows. And so I've heard multiple people on our faculty say, right now we're focused on people, loving and serving them. Fortunately, our school is continuing. They're still having classes. Students are in the classroom through the morning and afternoon, and then oftentimes they're helping with refugees and working with the children on campus. Some of the students have been accompanying our faculty to the border on trips to pick people up and bring them. So it's been a good experience for our students to be able to really have opportunities to serve with this. I did not get my trip into Moldova with Laura, as we had originally hoped to do a couple of weeks ago. But instead, as this crisis kind of came along, I've been on the phone nonstop with people overseas and with our partners here, and I mentioned we were raising finances and just trying to communicate well and really building a bridge for people to be able to pray for what's going on over there. I did get in a very short emergency trip to Bucharest, Romania. So Romania is just to the left of Moldova, and if you head towards the south, Bucharest it's about an 8-hour drive from our university. So I drove there and took some resources over and had meetings with some of our deans and faculty members. So we had a brief time together, but it was really good to be able to connect with them. The three men in the middle are teachers at our school. They're heads of different departments, so it was just a blessing to be able to see them for a little bit. The other gentleman that's there with us, he's representing another ministry, so the two of us decided to kind of go together and have an opportunity to travel to Romania. While we were there, we had a couple of days, so we wanted to see some of the refugee ministry that's happening in Romania. And again, all of these Eastern European countries are receiving refugees. Romania, Poland, Slovakia, there's a number of countries that are bringing them in. Some refugees are staying there long term, others are not. I will just tell you that people are working tirelessly. The guy in the upper corner there, he is a missionary with ABWE out of Harrisburg. He's from Missouri, but he was coordinating round-the-clock transportation pickups to and from the border. They literally had if somebody had a need, they'd put it in to a program, and then they'd suddenly have a driver that popped up. 2 a.m, we'll go to the border, we'll get them. Or someone needs to get to the airport. I experienced it firsthand. We had an early morning flight, so someone picked us up at 2:30 in the morning, and sure enough, there was a driver that said, we'll take them, no problem. So they're just nonstop transporting, but then they're also feeding people. There's a lot of, this particular place we were at in Romania, there's 8 churches working together, and they have about 250 refugees that are kind of under their care. So that was just really neat to see. Some of the one couple in the corner there, they actually were in Romania for about a week and a half to translate. They're from Latvia, and they speak Russian. And Ukrainians typically speak either Ukrainian or Russian. So you travel to Romania, where Romanian is the language, and it's culture shock. A lot of the people leaving Ukraine, they're in kind of shock anyway, and then suddenly you're in a foreign country that you've never been in before, and you don't speak the language. It's very, very stressful. So just having people who are able to serve in that way has been a big blessing to them as well. The other picture there, anytime you have people with beards together, apparently people want to take pictures, so that's what they did. So 2 of the guys there are missionaries getting ready to go to India. They were there to serve, and then the one guy is from Romania. He's part of the praise team. He said, my beard's too short to be in the picture, but we said, no, you're fine. So the opportunity to serve people food, that's just where they were feeding volunteers and refugees. And I'll just say that, the way that people are serving right now, one of the missionary workers who we had a chance to kind of spend a little time with and to encourage him, he has his own family, and a lot of the people in that part of Eastern Europe, they're not necessarily wealthy people. In fact, in Moldova, it's pretty poor conditions. But they're continually welcoming people in their homes and in their churches because they have nowhere to go from Ukraine. This one guy in this church in Romania, he and his wife welcomed in a family of 10. Okay, now I'm guessing some of you have probably had like big family gatherings at the holidays, and maybe you get, half dozen or a dozen people in your home, and it's probably a great time with family, but then you usually get to a place where it's like, you got to go back to normal, and you say goodbye. It was a great time having them there, but there's a beginning and an end sometimes to that. This particular family of 10, it was 2 grandparents, 2 parents, and then 6 children. I'll say children, although some of them were adult kids. 3 would have been forced to stay in Ukraine, the father and 2 older boys. One was 24 and one was 19. Had they not fled within hours of when the bombing started, they would have been forced to stay in Odessa, Ukraine, where they were from. But they came into Romania, and this missionary told me, he goes, they were kind of in shock when they first got here. It took them a few days just to even kind of settle down into what's going on. So they, kind of had this whole experience going on there. And I just thought about, the sacrifice of just saying, we'll open up our home for 10 days. For 10 people, unlimited time. They said they just keep apologizing for being there. And I understand that. I'd probably feel the same way and apologize that my family of 10 would be, just kind of taking up all the space. And the missionary finally said, you're here as long as you need to be here. It's not a problem. Please stop apologizing. And these are strangers who now are kind of part of their family. It's an opportunity. There's an open door. A few members of that Ukrainian family are Christian. I think of the 10, I think they said maybe 4 of them are Christian, but the others are not. But they're seeing the gospel lived out and proclaimed to them. So this is just a little picture of kind of what's taking place, at least at one of the sites. I wanted to also just share about the importance of when we extend love or compassion to someone, the impact it can make. At our camp in Moldova, there was a family that stayed there, and the director of the camp, who actually was the founder of it, he sent a message kind of relaying this lady's story. And it kind of personalizes or kind of humanizes the situation of somebody as they might flee Ukraine. Let me just this is kind of her thoughts as she journaled. So it sounds a little bit maybe random, scattered thoughts, but that's kind of where this person's at. So here's what she says. She says, we're on a second floor. The room has 10 beds. Clean, new beds, blankets, radiators. I have cookies in my pocket. I got a little sleep. The alarm goes off in the morning. I wake up as usual. Horror. I'm not at home. I'm alone with children, and my favorite person is in Odessa. I'm here. He's there. I snuggle into my pillow. Why is all of this happening? I brush my teeth. The dining room is in a separate building. I need to eat. I need to put on a smile for my kids. The mountains and the forest, tall pine trees, the lake, it smells like springtime. We are being fed. The name of the camp we're at is Camp Hope. The food is delicious. I think we made it to heaven. We're fed and being looked after. By who? By the teenagers who study here. Now they're the ones babysitting us. We're preparing to eat and to clean. There are 150 of us here. I'm trying to be of help in the kitchen. I find that my son is already there. Happiness is being at least a little useful. They have a special, this is on March 8th, she says they had a very special day to celebrate women. A concert, gifts, flowers. I've been crying all day. I'm leaving here tomorrow night. Next up, I don't know, but I no longer fear. I know they will help me, and I will take the help. My children will not see war. We will start anew. Thanks to these people, this place, I have hope again. Hope that there will be peace, that my children will study, find a job, create a family, that I will hug my husband. And my prayers will be for these people as long as I live. That's one person, and just, the reality of one day your life is upended and you have to flee. I'm glad, it's stressful for our ministry. I wish I could be with our partners more, but we're way more helpful for them here. We're continually working on projects together and communicating as much as we can on different things. Again, our school is operating, but God has us positioned right now in the path of this, refugee wave that's happening out of Ukraine. So I just kind of encourage you to pray for that. We are inviting people to support and to give to the fund that we're doing as far as meeting the needs of refugees. And we're going to have a lot of financial needs on our campus going forward. Moldova receives all of its natural gas from Russia. Prices, as you can imagine, have gone up, and they were actually going up even before the war. Now they've gone up even tenfold. And usage has gone up because all of the buildings are being used as we house refugees and things like that. So they're thankful some warmer weather's coming, but still, there's a lot of increasing prices. Fortunately, the supply chain is holding out, but I understand now they're starting to have some concerns that there's a limit as to how much you can buy of certain food items, and when you're feeding, 100 people on campus or 150, something they're trying to take into account. So, again, that's something that we've been kind of having. A month ago, I didn't know we'd be talking about this at this mission conference, but this is where God has us at right now. I did have a chance to help a little bit. The apartment that we stayed in, they actually didn't have furniture in it. The group in Romania has been buying every mattress and bed and whatever that they can get at IKEA, so I thought I'll help them build some beds in this apartment, and the guy was kind of losing it a little bit, so he decided to have fun with the picture and the drill. He really was a stable human being, even though he doesn't look like it in the picture there. He's a good guy. This is a pastor in Romania, and again, he'll just kind of represent pastors who are working in the refugee crisis. You can maybe play this video here. Let me see if this will...
John from Holy Trinity Baptist Church. We are
churches. I think it's beautiful to see churches partnering together, and in this part of the world, there's not a lot of evangelical churches, so you kind of have to work together, and it's really being effective in this particular outreach to refugees. And just the encouragement there that I know I talk with a lot of people here in the States where they're like, we just want to do something. And he said, just knowing that there's people praying, who are giving, who are, supporting the work that's happening there in that way. God has us in different places, and again, we can maximize what we're doing for the Lord as we turn to Him, seek for Him to provide in these kind of things. So I wanted to encourage you with, again, what's happening with this refugee crisis in Ukraine. Our partners, we're just continuing to try and meet their needs and to work with them as we go through this. I want to also just, in the remaining time that I have, and I'll make this fairly brief, but it's an important part of our program. I mentioned about the work that we're doing centers around Bible education for young people who are looking to become pastors and missionaries. And I love then connecting with people who have gone through the program, and they're sharing me updates from their youth group meetings, from their church gatherings that they have, or they're sharing about how they're working on the mission field. These things are really encouraging to me to see. And again, most of our countries that our students are coming from are from Central Asia. So just to give your geography again, there's an arrow, small little red arrow on the left side of the screen. That is Moldova. The stand countries, which are to the right of the screen, Kazakhstan is the largest one there in green. But Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan I have circled in red. I was just there in November and December to kind of meet with some of the individuals who have been partnering with us. We actually have some extension schools in Central Asia. So we do send some to Moldova, but there are some that are still in Central Asia, and they attend classes and are receiving education there. So I want to just share a little bit of what I want to present from my time in Tajikistan here in over the holidays. Well, it was Thanksgiving I was there, I should say. It's a strategic location, not just for reaching the people in Central Asia, but also it's great to be working with churches there where they're missional themselves. And you'll find that Tajikistan is located right next to Afghanistan. Pakistan is there. Iran is close by. Other parts of Central Asia. And one of the faculty members, I just shot a very short video with him, and he talks about why it's a strategic place for the gospel. So we When I went to Tajikistan, they actually have a law there against long beards. For people who live there, unless you're a religious teacher, an older teacher, someone who's over 60, then you're allowed to grow a little bit longer beard. But there's concern about radical Islam. There's concern about ISIS. And so they kind of associate those things together. So I didn't have to, but I thought, you know what, I drew enough attention to myself probably anyway, so I thought I don't need to have any other reasons to do that. So learned a lot while I was there. I do want to share a little bit about, again, our student program. When I do travel to Moldova, I teach a communications class. I work with those that want to be missionaries and pastoral students, and we talk about public speaking, what to do about anxiety. We talk about storytelling or effective use of illustration. We look at Scripture, basically, and look at God and Jesus as the master communicators. So it's a really fun class for a week that we do. So the top picture is one of my student classes from just a couple of years ago. Some Central Asian students having a time of fellowship on campus. It's just a really, really fun group to be around. These are some of the graduates of our program, and I did distort some of these images because at times the PowerPoints, if they end up online, I like to not have the pictures be too clear, so if they look a little distorted, that's intentional. But these young men graduated from the program last year, and so it was nice to hear about the ministry work they're all involved in right now, and they're currently being mentored by existing pastors, and I love to see that there's real emphasis on making sure that next generation of leaders is being cultivated and worked with. We were at various meetings with the leaders in Central Asia. These are a number of pastors and ministry leaders. And so we had opportunities to share together and to strategize about growing ministry in Central Asia and how our program fits together with that. And it was just a really good time to get to know them and a good time of fellowship that we had. The challenges in Central Asia are many. It is illegal to share Jesus with youth. If 18 or under, you're not to evangelize openly. We've actually had some people connected with our students who have spent time in prison, or some of our graduates, because they've evangelized someone who was a teenager. And that's part of the cost that they count when they share Christ. But it's important. They say, we can't be silent. But they have to kind of continually weigh, how do I go about conducting my ministry when it's difficult. There's a children's center there, and they teach art, they teach sport, they have a variety of programs, and they do have Bible lessons there. The school tries to fly under the radar a little bit, but they've got a number of youth, and it's neat to see the work that's happening there. I will also say that polygamy is a big issue in Central Asia, so many of these kids are neglected. If you're a child of the maybe least favored spouses, then you're kind of not provided for. You're kind of just cast off. So these kids having somewhere to go and to hear there's a God who loves them is really impactful for them. I will say, to represent Pennsylvania well, I did make sure these kids got their first taste of Hershey's chocolate, so M&Ms all around. So that young little girl was getting her first taste of Pennsylvania chocolate. I'm assuming that's a happy face, I think. So she was kind of like not sure about it at first. I mentioned the challenges in Central Asia. The picture there of the gentleman, he's been fined multiple times for having a church. Right in the bottom of his apartment complex, they have a meeting room. It's a very simple room. I think they can fit about 15 to 20 people in there if you're like this, on a hard bench. And after I had gotten there, or after we left, I got a message saying that he was fined again. They told them not to meet. So he said to his members of his church, I guess church is in our place on the next Sunday. So it's a very small apartment, but somehow they would have fit their church into their apartment. They just know we have to fellowship together. But again, this is the reality of persecution that happens. It comes from the government. It comes from the community. I hear stories from youth that go to our school, and they'll tell me about how they maybe were bullied in school when people found out that they were Christians. Oftentimes, mom and dad may lose their jobs when people find out that it's a Christian family. So it can come in a lot of different ways. It's one of the reasons why we have a business program at our school, because to be able to start their own businesses and provide for people in the church is hugely important, because it's very difficult to find work if people know that you are a Christian. Also, the family pressure that happens within the family. I had a young man who's a graduate, and he lives in Uzbekistan, and he told me about how his uncle actually tried to burn their house down. His parents came to Christ, and the family and this brother of his father was very antagonistic about it, and he tried to burn their house down, pressuring them to return back to the religion of the family. Another young lady, a sweetheart, she's very quiet, but she's just got a very, very sweet personality. She shared with me about, and she's from Tajikistan, and she told me that she was the first one in her family to come to Christ. A friend of hers invited her to an event, and she heard about Jesus in a totally new way. So she comes to Christ, and she said she was thankful her family did not cast her out. That oftentimes can be the case. I've heard from others where families will pressure them out. Sometimes it varies as to what that looks like, but she was thankful her family didn't do that. She did say that they pressured her greatly, really trying to guilt her into coming back to the faith of the family. And she said, that she was committed to Jesus Christ, that he brought her salvation, and she decided, I'll just keep loving my family. Well, it was her demonstration of love that now she has several members of her family that have come to Christ. And they saw her faithful witness, and they realized there was a genuine change in her life, and they wanted to know more about it. I'm so glad she's graduating from our missions department here this year. It's just exciting because, I know the spirit that she has, that God's gonna use her, and I love to hear about how the students are saying how they're growing through what they're receiving through the program. In Tajikistan, a different refugee crisis. It feels maybe like a long, long time ago when the situation and the collapse took place in Afghanistan and the Taliban resumed control. For years, people have been fleeing Afghanistan. We had a Central Asian-style meal. I don't know, youth, if you've ever had an opportunity to sit around on the floor and have your meal, but that's typically what it looks like in Central Asia. Some were impressed that I was able to actually stand back up after you sit for like an hour eating like that. It's not super easy, but we did it, and the food was actually very, very good. But one of a gentleman that fled Afghanistan 10 years ago, he wanted to make a meal for us and did a wonderful job on it. But we heard his story about his family and the persecution that took place. His brother was murdered by the Taliban because he had a pocket testament in his pocket. And the family had been pressured for a while, and so then we heard about, it's a little too long to share tonight, but just the story of how God watched over them and how they left Afghanistan. They still have family there in Afghanistan. They still have a heart for their people, but they know that God has them in Tajikistan right now. And it's difficult for refugees. I mentioned the Ukrainian situation. I think we're seeing countries that are being very welcoming, at least most of the time. Right now with this crisis that's happening. Other times that's not been the case. For people who leave Afghanistan, it can be very difficult in a country like Tajikistan. It's hard to find work. In fact, it's kind of set up where you can't really get work. So it's a very sometimes hopeless type feeling. Our program, we're working with churches there, and we're distributing food to people in need. You can see some of the kids there that are getting food packets and stuff, and some fun items that maybe come. These families have nothing. But we've also been hearing about how some of these Afghan families are either attending Tajik churches, or some pockets of Afghan churches are starting, and some of the Tajik leaders are kind of getting them started with their churches. So it's really neat to see, again, about how the hope that we have in Jesus is sharing in difficult places. There's open doors. And again, praying for open hearts and that mouths would be opened, and we're excited to be a part of it at Keys. Just final image from Tajikistan. I mentioned the beauty of the mountains there. About 90% of that country is mountainous, and we went switchback roads. And it was an adventure. About halfway through my trip, had a stomach problem from something I either ate or drank, and there's 2 cities that you go between, and it's about a 7-hour drive, and it's a lot of this back and forth, all this kind of thing, and there's not a lot of rest areas anywhere along the way. So fortunately, everything was okay, but it was part of the adventure. We even had to shoo goats off the road at one point in time. So there are obstacles out there. Sometimes you just don't know what you're going to encounter. Right now, we focus on, who knows, you get a snow squall. Sometimes things happen and they maybe catch us by surprise. But there's opportunities, again, to share the gospel, and that's true overseas. It's true right here in Pennsylvania as well. So I hope that, as you go through this mission conference, that God just maybe refreshes your soul and your heart, just the fact that people need the gospel. And I think it's always good that we preach the gospel to ourselves, reminding ourselves that, God has saved us, and exactly what his love, translates to in our lives. So that's a message that we want to share. And I'm the executive director at Keys. We're a small organization in Liverpool. So this is the kind of work that we're overseeing. I travel typically 2 or 3 times a year for 10 days to 2 weeks. Like I said, I'll do some teaching. I'll oversee projects and kind of meet with administration. And I love to interview the students and get their stories and things like that. But part of what I've been doing is making sure that the organization here is growing, so that way we can continue to sustain and keep up with the rate of growth that's happening overseas. The school that we work with in Moldova started off with maybe a dozen people meeting in one room. And then Keys, back around 1999 or so, got involved, and some other partners as well. And that school now has between 150 and 200 students on any given year. Enrollment changes a little bit, but it's been great, not just in terms of numbers, but just seeing the scope of outreach and the network that's building. And our organization is their largest partner, and we want to continue to be there. So I've been kind of devoting myself to, again, growing the home office here as we try and support what's taking place. And we're thankful that God's put some of the pieces in place, because it's made us so much more prepared to respond to something like this crisis that's happened in Ukraine. We're more equipped today to do that than we might have been a few years back. So that's some of the work that I'm doing. I'm really excited about it. Laura, I know, loves it. Back when we dated, and it was probably even more so on her radar than mine, but when we dated, she said, really had a burden for us to be involved in missions at some point together. And I thought that was a good idea too, and the radio thing's been my thing, and she's kind of done counseling and social work, and we've done some things together, but this has really been a really blessing from God that we've been able to kind of connect together and working with this organization. So we love it. It's at our passion level that we're excited about it, and just excited to see what God's going to do in the future going forward as well. So appreciate your church. Thanks for letting me share about it. I hope it's encouraged you, just hearing how God's at work. And we invite your participation and partnership however you want to. Our student programs, that's an ongoing need all the time. We do have the current refugee fund. I'm at about 80% of my support levels, so I'm kind of looking to kind of finish that out as well. We just want to be a blessing, to the churches here. And again, we just really appreciate it. So let me pray for you guys.